I should probably start by introducing myself. My name is Richard Calloway, and I've been working as a pyrotechnic technician for over 12 years. Growing up, I was always the kind of kid who loved things that went boom. Most people think of fireworks as simple displays, flashes of color in the night sky. For me, they were an art form, an intricate dance of science and passion that I could control, design, and execute. It wasn't just about the explosion. It was about what came before, the meticulous planning, the anticipation, and the thrill of watching everything come together perfectly. It was about mastery, independence, and freedom. I've always prided myself on my ability to handle fireworks like a seasoned artist handling a brush. There's something about the process, the setup, the careful arrangement of each shell and fuse that feels almost sacred. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working on some of the largest fireworks displays in the country. The 4th of July is always a high point for me, but the one that I'm most proud of is the Fortunato Jimenez Fireworks Show. That show is something of a tradition in our town. It draws people from all over, and I'm always the one entrusted with the setup. To me, that show represents everything I stand for: skill, precision, and the freedom to create something that everyone can enjoy. In the years leading up to the accident, my life had become a routine of building those massive displays, training the next generation of pyrotechnicians, and sometimes stepping away from everything just to recharge. I live alone, no wife, no kids, and that's by choice. My work is my life. It's my family, my passion, my purpose. The moment I step into the field, surrounded by crates of fireworks, the smell of sulfur in the air, the hum of electricity coursing through the fuses, it's like the world shrinks down to just that one moment. I'm in control. And that, to me, is the ultimate freedom. Nothing else matters but what I can create with my own two hands. But there was always a sense of danger lurking, one that I was fully aware of and, in a way, embraced. Fireworks are volatile, unpredictable. A misstep can cost you everything. The stakes were always high, but I had always believed that it was my skill, my experience, my ability to understand the nuances of fire and light that would keep me safe. I'd seen accidents, heard the stories of colleagues who had been injured or worse, but those were always other people, not me. I was meticulous. I was prepared. The 4th of July that year was no different. The weather was perfect for a display, clear skies, a light breeze. The setup for the Fortunato Jimenez Fireworks Show was going smoothly. Everything was going according to plan. I'd been in the business long enough to know how to avoid problems, how to anticipate every possible mishap before it happened. I'd spent days coordinating the fuses, making sure the shells were properly positioned, adjusting for the wind patterns. I was ready. More than ready, I felt invincible. It wasn't arrogance. Not really. It was a kind of deep confidence. Confidence built over years of hard work and dedication. The crowd had started to gather in the park, excited for the show. Families spread out on blankets, kids running around with sparklers, the distant hum of music playing from the main stage. It was always the same scene, but every year it felt like it had a new significance. There was something about watching those fireworks light up the sky that made people feel free, united, and alive. It symbolized freedom, the freedom to celebrate, to enjoy life, to let go of everything for just a few moments and stare up at the stars as the night sky erupted in color. I thought about that a lot, the idea of freedom. It's a concept we throw around so casually. Freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom to do what we want. But I always thought of freedom in terms of what I could control. For me, fireworks weren't just a show. They were an expression of independence. I was the one who set the conditions. I was the one who decided when and how the night would light up. I could make it anything I wanted, any shape, any color, any pattern. To me, that was true freedom. As I was putting the final touches on the setup, I remember standing there looking at the row of shells waiting to be lit. Everything was in order. It was like I had this unique relationship with the fireworks. I knew them like I knew myself. I knew their rhythm, their timing, their reactions. I was the master of my domain, the conductor of a grand explosive orchestra. Then, just as I was about to finish my final checks, something went wrong. It wasn't a big thing, just a tiny misfire in one of the fuses, but it was enough. It happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. A bright flash, a loud bang that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me, and then everything went black. I can't tell you what happened in that moment, whether I lost consciousness immediately or if time just distorted, but I do know that in that instant, everything changed. That sense of control, that sense of being the master of my world was gone. The independence I had so carefully cultivated in my work, my life, everything I believed in was shattered in an instant. As the dust settled and the chaos of the explosion began to sink in, I had no idea that my life was about to take a turn I could never have imagined. The explosion. That's the moment when everything that came before, everything I had worked for, meant nothing anymore. I didn't even feel pain at first. I just felt detached. The world around me, the screams, the panic, the confusion, it all seemed distant, like I was watching it from a great distance. The last thing I remember before I left my body was seeing the chaos around me. The bright flashes of light as the fireworks continued to explode, only now it was uncontrollable, random, destructive. But then just as quickly as everything had turned to chaos, it all began to fade. The heat, the noise, the sensation of my body, it all became insignificant. Something else was happening now. I felt myself rising, leaving the earth, leaving the destruction, leaving the world behind. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bound by gravity, by pain, or by the weight of responsibility. I was free. It wasn't fear I felt, no, there was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. It was a kind of peace, a calm that washed over me. I wasn't alone, but I wasn't sure who was with me. I could still see the world, still sense the fire and the noise and the frantic movements of people running to help, but it was like I was floating just outside of it, untouchable. I could feel the warmth of the explosion, but I wasn't burned. I could hear the screams, but I wasn't scared. It was as though I had become part of something bigger, something outside of myself, something that wasn't limited by the rules of the world I knew. I don't know how long it lasted, this strange state of floating in the void, but during that time I started to understand something. The idea of independence that had always been my guiding star, my freedom to create, to control, to build, suddenly felt small, insignificant. It was as if I had stepped outside of myself and seen the true nature of existence, of what it meant to be free. Freedom, I realized, wasn't just about being able to control things, to shape the world around me with my hands. It wasn't about individual strength or personal mastery. True freedom, I realized, was something far more profound, something I had never even imagined before. It was about letting go of control, of fear, of the need to prove oneself. True freedom came from understanding that we are not isolated beings bound by our own desires and ambitions, but part of a greater whole, a greater plan. And that was when I felt it, the warmth, the light, the unmistakable sense of peace. I didn't know where I was, but I knew without a doubt that it was a place of unconditional love, a place where true freedom existed, a place where I could finally breathe without the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. The explosion was so sudden that it felt like the entire world cracked open in an instant. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even a flash of light. It was everything at once. An eruption of raw energy, a violent interruption of everything I thought I knew about control. 1 second, I was standing among the shells, preparing the final touches on the display. The next, I was elsewhere. I can't describe it in a way that makes logical sense because it wasn't like anything I had ever experienced in the physical world. It wasn't like falling asleep or fainting. It wasn't a slow drift or a gradual descent into darkness. It was more like stepping through a door that I didn't even realize was there. The blast knocked the breath out of me before I even knew what was happening. My body, still in motion from the work I was doing, jerked as the world erupted around me. But then, just like that, I felt myself rising. It was as if gravity itself had given up on holding me down, and I was free to drift upward, weightless. I could see my own body lying on the ground, motionless. The dirt and debris around me created a chaotic haze, and people were rushing to and fro, their faces painted with panic and confusion. The air was thick with the acrid scent of sulfur, the crackle of fireworks gone wrong, and the distant sounds of people shouting, some of it muffled, like I was hearing it from a great distance. But as I floated higher, rising above the scene, the world below seemed less important. It was like stepping out of the confines of a cage and seeing the bars fade away into the vast open sky. I was still aware of my body, still connected to it somehow, but it didn't seem to matter anymore. I could see my arms, my legs sprawled out, and the blood staining the dirt beneath me. The feeling of physical pain, that once relentless sensation of my body's vulnerability, didn't reach me. I wasn't confined to my body anymore. In fact, I felt nothing about it at all. No fear, no regret, no anger. Instead, I was filled with something else. A strange and profound sense of freedom washed over me, so vast and complete that it left no room for anything else. It was as if I was no longer confined by my skin, by my bones, by the limitations that had always defined me. In my life, I had prided myself on my ability to control everything around me. The fireworks, the show, my career, my independence. But in this moment, I realized something. Control had always been an illusion. I had never truly controlled anything. As I hovered above the scene, watching the frantic efforts of those below me, something started to crystallize in my mind. The sense of freedom I had always pursued, the independence I had spent my life cultivating, was fragile. A misfire, an error, a split-second mistake, and everything could crumble. Life wasn't just fragile in a physical sense, it was fragile in a spiritual sense. We live as though we are the masters of our fate, but in reality, we are so much more vulnerable than we like to admit. A single spark, a breath of wind, a twist of fate, anything can change our world forever. I had thought that my ability to control the fireworks, to manage the chaos of the display, gave me power. But now, I understood that true freedom had nothing to do with that control. It wasn't that I didn't feel alive. Quite the opposite. I felt more alive than I ever had. There was no weight pressing down on me, no anxiety about the future, no worry about how things would turn out. I had always thought that being in control of my life, of my work, of my destiny, was what made me free. But what I felt now was something else entirely, something far more profound than the fleeting satisfaction of managing fireworks. This wasn't about doing or achieving, it was about being. The more I looked down at my body, the more detached I became from it. I could see the blood pooling around me, see the panic in the faces of those around me, but I didn't feel the need to be part of it. I wasn't bound by the confusion below. I wasn't tethered to the physical world anymore. It was like I had transcended something, a boundary, a limit, an understanding of reality I had never before considered. And then I felt something shift again. It was subtle at first, a warmth, a lightness, like the sun breaking through the clouds. The sensation of freedom grew stronger, and with it a deep sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly home. Not in a place, not in a body, but in a state of being that was beyond anything I could have comprehended. I floated, weightless, as the chaos below continued to unfold. I could feel the presence of something, someone, just beyond the edges of my awareness. It wasn't a person, not in the way I had ever thought about people before. It was a presence, a force, something that drew me in, as if I were being pulled toward a magnetic core. It was impossible to explain, but in that moment, I understood that this was where I was meant to be. This was where true freedom lay. And as I continued to float, disconnected from the chaos, detached from my physical body, something inside of me clicked. It wasn't the fireworks, the displays, the independence I had so carefully curated that mattered anymore. Those things were fleeting, fragile. True freedom came from something far greater, something I had never fully understood before. The control I had so carefully guarded over the years had been nothing more than a way to keep me feeling safe, to keep me from confronting the deeper truths of life and existence. I had relied so much on my ability to control the physical world, but now, looking at it from above, I saw that there was something beyond that. The fireworks, the crowds, the sounds of the night, these were all part of the illusion. The momentary flashes of light in the sky, the brief bursts of color, they were nothing compared to the vastness I was experiencing now. The fleeting nature of human existence, of my existence, had never been clearer. And yet, in this moment, there was no fear of that. I was at peace. But as I floated there, lost in the new expansive understanding of freedom, I realized something else. I wasn't alone. There was something, or rather someone, waiting for me. The sensation of floating, of being completely unanchored to my body and the world I had known, had shifted. What I had initially interpreted as mere detachment, a kind of exhilarating freedom, had begun to deepen. It was as if the vastness of everything, the weightlessness, the profound peace, had drawn me into something more, something that called to me in a way I could not explain. It wasn't just an abstract feeling anymore. There was a presence, a warmth, a radiance that beckoned me, like the first rays of dawn breaking through a dark, endless night. I couldn't see it at first, just the light, the glow. But it wasn't like any light I had ever seen on Earth. It was not harsh or blinding, but gentle, all-encompassing, pure. It felt like love itself had taken shape and was stretching out toward me. As I was pulled closer, the glow began to form, slowly, deliberately, into a figure, a man standing before me. The figure was illuminated, yet not by any earthly light, but by something far beyond the material world. His presence, his being, was so powerful that I could barely comprehend it. I felt drawn to him in a way that surpassed understanding. It was like being pulled into the very center of the universe, yet somehow I wasn't afraid. The closer I got, the more the feeling of love intensified. I could feel it wrap around me, warm and tender, like a blanket, like a homecoming. It was unconditional, undeniable, and deeply, profoundly safe. The figure in front of me became clearer. His face, though serene, was radiant, full of grace and peace. His eyes, those eyes, pierced right through me, and in that moment, I felt seen. Not the outer me, not the me that had been a pyrotechnic technician, not the me who had lived a life of control and independence. No, I felt seen at a level so deep. It felt like my very soul was being understood. It was a knowing that surpassed all reasoning. He stood there, waiting for me, and without a word, I knew who he was: Jesus. The one I had heard about in church, the one whose teachings I had read in the Bible, but whose true nature I had never fully grasped until this moment. His voice broke through the silence, not with words, but with an essence, a deep, comforting resonance that seemed to fill the space around us. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice like a soft breeze carrying the weight of infinite love. "I have been with you always, and I am with you now." His words were simple, but their depth was immeasurable. I felt an overwhelming flood of peace wash over me, and all the tension, all the confusion that had clouded my mind since the explosion melted away. "You've been seeking freedom your whole life, Richard," he continued, his voice gentle but firm. "But true freedom doesn't come from control. It doesn't come from self-reliance, from grasping at power, from independence in the way you have understood it. No, true freedom is the ability to let go." As he spoke, I felt a flood of realizations rush through me. The fireworks, the displays, the control I had so meticulously exercised over my life, my work, my independence, none of it mattered. In the light of his presence, those things seemed so small, so inconsequential. I had prided myself on my self-reliance, on the freedom that came from being the master of my craft, the one who could make things explode and dance to my will. But now, standing in front of Jesus, I saw that I had misunderstood everything. "You are free when you can release fear," he said, stepping closer, his presence so overwhelming that it felt like my very soul was being embraced. "You are free when you trust, when you let go of the illusion of control, and when you accept the love that is always available to you. This love is not conditional. It is not earned. It is the very essence of who you are, of who I am, of who you are meant to be." At that moment, the weight of my own limitations, the weight of my life and work, seemed to lift completely. All the pressure, all the self-imposed burdens evaporated. There was no more striving, no more need to prove myself, to show that I was in control, to create something spectacular for the world to see. All of that was gone, replaced by a simple, all-encompassing love. A love that didn't ask anything from me, except for me to open myself to it. Jesus spoke again, this time a bit more softly, though his words felt like they were etched into my very soul. "Independence is not found in isolation, Richard," he said. "It is found in union with each other, with all of creation, and with the divine. True freedom is not about standing apart from the world, but embracing it in love. You do not have to carry your burdens alone. You never have to. The freedom you seek is not about doing it all on your own. It is about surrendering to the greater plan, to the flow of life and love that connects all things." The implications of his words hit me with such force that I could hardly breathe. I had spent my whole life trying to create something that was mine, something I could control. My fireworks displays, my independence, my career, All of it had been about asserting my own power, my own authority. But now I understood. The freedom I had been chasing was fleeting. It was temporary. It was self-serving. Jesus didn't just offer me the freedom of letting go of control. He offered me something deeper, an eternal freedom, the kind that came not from my own strength, but from a complete and total surrender to love and to unity. It wasn't about standing apart from others, creating distance between myself and the world. It was about merging with it, becoming part of something far greater than I had ever realized. There was no judgment in his voice, just an overwhelming sense of peace. No condemnation for the mistakes I had made, no reproach for the independence I had clung to. Instead, there was only love, unconditional, all-encompassing love. The kind of love that doesn't ask anything of you except to receive it. "There's no need for fear, Richard," he said, his voice wrapping around me like a soft, warm blanket. "You are safe, you are loved, you are free." The truth of his words filled me like a flood. I felt it in my chest, in my heart, in the deepest recesses of my soul. The illusion of separation, the belief that I was alone, that I had to carry the weight of the world on my own shoulders, dissolved completely. It was replaced with the reality that I had never been alone, that I had always been part of something greater, something far more powerful than I could have ever understood. For the first time in my life, I felt what true freedom really meant. It wasn't about controlling everything or proving my strength. It wasn't about having the power to make fireworks explode at my will. It was about letting go of fear, of pride, of the need to prove myself. It was about trusting in something greater than myself, something far more beautiful than any firework display I had ever orchestrated. And as I stood in his presence, bathed in his light, I realized that the freedom I had been searching for wasn't something I could create, it was something I could receive. It wasn't about independence, but about unity. Unity with God, with others, with the universe itself. And in that unity, I was finally free. There was no judgment in Jesus' eyes, only love, only peace, only freedom. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be free. The radiance of Jesus' presence began to fade, though not in a way that felt like a departure. It was more as if his light had expanded, enveloping me until it seemed to merge with everything around me. The sense of separation between us dissolved completely, and I found myself still in his presence, but now with an entirely new awareness, drawn toward something else. The space around me had transformed, shifting beyond anything I had ever known. It wasn't just light nor darkness, it was something deeper, something timeless, where boundaries no longer existed. I couldn't say how I arrived in this new place, but suddenly, I was there. Time, as I had understood it, didn't seem to exist here. It wasn't that it was suspended or paused, it was simply irrelevant. There was no concept of past, no worry about the future. There was only now. The idea of before and after had vanished, leaving behind an eternal moment. Everything in this place was interconnected, like threads woven together into an intricate tapestry. The threads themselves were part of a greater whole, and in that whole they held meaning. As I took in the surroundings, I was struck by the profound sense of unity that radiated from this place. It felt like being in the heart of the universe, where every star, every particle, every breath of air was not separate, but part of an intricate design. There were no individuals here. There were no separate desires, no separate pursuits of self. Everything, every being, every thought, every movement was part of the same flow. The sense of isolation, which I had once believed to be the hallmark of true freedom, was absent. Instead of a world of independence, where each soul fought to carve out its own existence, there was harmony. I felt the deep, resonating truth that all things were interconnected, that there was no me separate from the you, and no you separate from the them. We were all part of the same pulse, the same rhythm, and that rhythm was not something we created. It was something we participated in, together. In this place, there were beings. Some were human-like in form, others were not, but all were radiating a light so pure it was hard to comprehend. They moved, not for their own sake, but as part of the great flow of this existence. Their every action seemed perfectly coordinated, not out of necessity, but because they knew that their contribution to the whole was its own form of freedom. They were not interested in achieving anything for themselves. Their freedom wasn't a personal pursuit. Instead, they gave of themselves without hesitation, without reserve, because their existence was centered on contributing to the greater harmony. One being, a figure of brilliant light and shimmering color, approached me. It didn't speak with words. It spoke with understanding. I felt it rather than heard it, an overwhelming sensation that I was being invited to understand the truth of this place. It wasn't that this being lacked individuality. Rather, its individuality was part of the larger whole. It wasn't diminished by being part of something greater. It was expanded. It wasn't seeking to separate itself from anything else. There was no need for separation in this realm because there was no competition. There was no ego. There was no struggle. Only unity. I realized then that the beings I was seeing were not preoccupied with their personal desires. They did not strive to prove their worth or define their freedom by how separate they could be. They had transcended that. True freedom in this place was not about fighting for autonomy or independence. It was about contributing to the greater whole, being part of something so vast and intricate that their individual contributions were part of a much larger picture, an eternal flow. In this place, each being had a role, but that role was not defined by personal ambition. It was defined by the role they played in the grand design. The words came to me as if from within. True freedom comes not from what you can take for yourself, but from what you can offer to the whole. It is found in unity, in the surrender of separation, in the embrace of your part in the larger flow. And that's when it hit me. The truth I'd been searching for all my life. The fireworks I had orchestrated, the displays I had carefully arranged, they were beautiful in their way, but they were isolated in their nature. They were fleeting. They existed only in moments, and when they were gone, they were gone. In this place, however, there was no fleeting beauty. There was no moment that was lost. There was no struggle to hold on to anything. It was all eternal, all timeless. Every piece, every being, every action contributed to the whole, and in doing so, found its deepest meaning. The universe was not a collection of isolated pieces. Each was part of a greater dance, a greater understanding. The idea of independence, in the way I had understood it, dissolved into something much deeper. I felt as though I had stepped into a truth that was beyond understanding. It wasn't a philosophical concept. It was a feeling, a knowing, something that resonated in the very core of my being. This was true freedom, not the ability to separate, but the ability to belong, to give oneself to the greater flow, to contribute to something that was beyond individual desire or fear. And yet, this wasn't a loss of self. It wasn't about becoming a faceless part of a larger mechanism. No, this was the truest form of individuality, a sense of purpose so deep and profound that it was no longer about self-interest. The freedom of the individual in this place came from being part of the whole, from knowing that one's life had meaning because it was linked to something eternal, something far more vast than personal freedom could ever be. I saw then what I had been missing. My entire life had been spent in pursuit of something, independence, control, autonomy, that was never truly mine to claim. I had fought for it, shaped my life around it, and believed that it would bring me peace. But true peace, true freedom, came not from the act of isolating oneself from the world, but from the act of embracing it, surrendering to it, and realizing that we are all part of something greater. The beings in this place did not seek independence. They sought to contribute, to share in the eternal flow of existence. Their freedom was found in their union with all things, in the way they moved together, in the way they served a greater purpose. And I realized that this was the freedom I had been searching for. It was not the freedom to act alone, to control and dominate. It was the freedom to act in harmony, to be part of something larger than myself, and in that, to find the deepest meaning. I understood now that true freedom does not come from escaping the world or cutting oneself off from it. It comes from joining with it, from surrendering the need for independence in order to find a deeper connection, a connection that transcends time and space, a connection that is eternal. In that unity, we find not just our freedom, but our purpose. The beings around me glowed with this understanding. And in that moment, I knew that I too was part of this flow, this grand eternal dance. And it was in this unity, in this surrender, that I had found the truest freedom of all. in the end, freedom was not a solitary thing. It was the togetherness of all things, each contributing to the whole, each belonging, each part of the divine, interconnected plan. It was in that knowledge that I felt the deepest peace and the deepest freedom. I don't know how it happened, but in the blink of an eye, the boundless unity of the eternal realm I had just experienced began to fade. The warmth, the harmony, the peaceful interconnection of all things, slowly it all slipped away like a dream being pulled back into the shadows, and what replaced it was cold, hard, chaotic. I stood, or rather, I hovered, for I was no longer bound by the limitations of a body, on the edge of something jagged and broken. The sense of unity was gone. Instead, I found myself in a world that seemed divided, disconnected, splintered into a million shards. I could hear voices, but they didn't speak with harmony or understanding. They clashed, argued, shouted at one another, voices desperate for something they couldn't quite grasp, as if all their energy was spent fighting for something that was slipping away. I saw a man standing in a bustling city square. He wore a suit, his face twisted in frustration as he argued with another person. They were both pointing fingers, neither listening to the other, both convinced that their version of reality was the right one. The man in the suit yelled, "I earned this, it's mine, you can't take it from me." His words were bitter, laced with anger, as if something precious had been stolen from him. He was fighting to maintain what he thought was his personal freedom, but it wasn't bringing him peace. It was making him smaller, more confined. His eyes were wild, desperate, searching for something that would satisfy him. But there was nothing that could. I shifted my gaze and I saw another scene. This time, a woman in a crowded cafe, scrolling on her phone. Her face was clouded with comparison and self-doubt. She looked at photos of people living perfect lives, and she felt the familiar pang of inadequacy. Her independence was wrapped up in what she could accumulate, how she could present herself. The walls she had built around her to protect her self-image had only served to isolate her further. She felt alone, even in a room full of people. Her own sense of worth was tied to her success, her looks, her possessions, but none of it brought her peace. It only deepened the divide she felt inside, the sense that she wasn't enough. Everywhere I looked, I saw more of the same. People were fighting for their own space, their own success, their own sense of independence. And in doing so, they were only separating themselves from others. It was as if each individual was trying to carve out their own piece of the world, staking a claim to something that didn't belong to them alone. The struggle for freedom, personal freedom, individual success, had fragmented the world into pieces. People were building walls between themselves, protecting what they thought was their own. But in doing so, they were closing off the very connection they needed to feel whole. I saw a group of men arguing in an office meeting, each one trying to outdo the other, each one seeking to prove their worth by belittling the others. They weren't listening to one another, just talking over each other, trying to assert their dominance. The drive for individual success had created a toxic environment where cooperation and understanding had no place. The very idea of working together, of coming together to build something greater, was lost. It was all about me, about proving one's own value, as though that was the only way to gain respect. In the streets, people were fighting for their rights, each side convinced that they were the ones who deserved to be heard. I saw protesters on both sides of an issue, hurling insults, unable to find common ground. The pursuit of personal freedom had turned into a war of wills. Everyone shouting, everyone fighting to be seen, but nobody willing to listen. The divide between them grew wider and deeper with each passing moment. Their cries for freedom had become cries for validation, for affirmation, for recognition of their own worth. But in the end, all it did was create a chasm between them, one that grew impossible to cross. I felt the weight of it, the weight of the brokenness. I felt the desperation in their voices, the frustration in their eyes, the loneliness in their hearts. I saw their constant need to prove their own value, to assert their independence, and how it only left them empty. None of them found peace. None of them found what they were truly looking for. The harder they fought for their own freedom, the more they lost the connection to each other. The fragmentation was everywhere. It was in families where members no longer spoke, because they had different beliefs. It was in friendships that had shattered over misunderstandings and pride. It was in governments, in communities, in societies, where people couldn't see beyond their own perspectives to understand the perspectives of others. The world had become a maze of disjointed desires, each person fighting for their own piece of independence. But in doing so, they had broken apart the very thing that could have brought them peace, connection. It was as if they were all missing the point. The more they clung to their individuality, the more they misunderstood the true nature of freedom. The pursuit of independence had led them into cycles of isolation, competition, and conflict. It had built walls around their hearts, making it impossible to bridge the gaps between them. As I floated above this broken world, I could feel the yearning in my own soul. I had witnessed the true meaning of freedom, the unity, the surrender, the beauty of being part of something greater than myself. But down here, in this fragmented world, all I saw was pain and misunderstanding. I felt the deep sadness of it, the aching gap between what was and what could be. The contrast was jarring. I had felt the profound peace of the eternal realm, the connectedness that permeated every fiber of existence. But here, in this world, people were lost, clinging to their own illusions of freedom, building walls between themselves and each other. They had misunderstood what freedom really meant. They thought it was about breaking free from others, but it was actually about finding connection, about surrendering the false idea of independence in order to experience true unity. I felt the pain of the world, of its brokenness, of the division. The very thing that was meant to bring peace had become a source of suffering. They were all fighting for freedom, but it was a freedom that trapped them. They were all seeking something they didn't understand. I longed for the unity I had experienced in the realm I had just left. It was a unity born not out of force, but out of love, out of trust, out of belonging. And yet, here in this world, there was only fragmentation. The very thing they needed, connection, was the thing they were pushing away. Their pursuit of personal freedom had turned into an endless cycle of conflict and division. I watched them struggle, and I could feel the weight of their misunderstanding pressing down on me. They didn't realize it, but their fight for independence was a fight that was keeping them apart, keeping them from the true freedom that could only be found in unity. And I knew then that my journey wasn't over. I had been shown the truth, the eternal unity that lay beyond the world's divisions. But the world, this broken fragment, to hear that truth, needed to hear that truth. It needed to understand that freedom wasn't about self-reliance or isolation. It was about surrendering to love, to unity, to the greater whole. Only then could the walls be torn down. Only then could the pain and suffering cease. I couldn't leave this world in its current state. I couldn't let it continue down this path of division and isolation. But I also knew that it would take more than just a vision to change it. It would take action. It would take people who understood the truth of freedom, the freedom that comes from connection, from belonging to something greater than themselves. It would take a shift in understanding, a shift in hearts. And as the vision of this broken world continued to unfold before me, I knew that I had a role to play in that shift. I couldn't stand by and watch as people continued to build walls, to fight for a freedom that only brought them pain. I had to go back, to show them what I had seen, to help them understand the true meaning of freedom. But first, I had to return. I had to bring the message back to them. The world wasn't beyond hope, but it needed to be reminded of what true freedom really was. And I was going to help show them. I had just witnessed the truth. The ultimate freedom was not about clinging to individuality or self-reliance. It was about surrendering to something greater. Something far beyond what I had known. Something that flowed through everything, through every living being and beyond time and space itself. But even as I stood in awe of this understanding, a subtle shift began to stir around me. An urgency in the air that hadn't been there before. I wasn't sure how long I had been in that place, but time had lost its meaning. And then, as though it were a natural unfolding, the light began to grow brighter, warmer, and more focused. It enveloped me again, this time with an even greater intensity. The peace and love I had known in the presence of Jesus intensified, but so did the weight of something. Urgent, a call, a purpose. A figure began to take shape, emerging from the light. It was Jesus. But this time his presence felt even more powerful, his countenance filled with a sense of profound concern. He was looking at me, his eyes steady and filled with compassion, yet behind them was an undeniable urgency, something he needed to say. His voice came, not as a whisper, but as a resounding call that filled every part of me. "My child," he said, his voice carrying the weight of eternity. "The world is at a crossroads. The path humanity is on is leading to destruction. The misunderstanding of what true freedom is has caused great suffering. People are trapped in cycles of isolation, in the false belief that independence comes from separating themselves from one another, from the divine." I could feel the tension in his words. There was an undeniable urgency. Something had to change, and it had to change now. He looked at me, and I could feel his gaze pierce through to the core of who I was, as if he was looking not just at my soul, but through the very fabric of human history. His words hung in the air, thick with the weight of the moment. Humanity's desire for independence, for self-sufficiency, has caused them to break apart, to turn away from the love that binds all things together. Their pursuit of freedom, untempered by love and understanding, has caused them to become fragmented, divided. They are fighting battles with no end, seeking to prove their worth, to claim their own space, to take what they believe is rightfully theirs. But in doing so, they have forgotten the true source of freedom. I felt the truth of his words resonate deep within me. This was the same truth I had witnessed, the same understanding that had opened my eyes to the larger reality. But as he spoke, something deep within me stirred, a yearning to act, a deep, almost painful awareness that the world had to be reached, that this message needed to be shared, and quickly. "Time is running out," Jesus continued, his voice now more tender, but with an urgency that could not be ignored. "The world is not as it should be. People are blinded by their need to prove their independence, and in doing so, they have severed the bonds that connect them. The chains of fear, pride, and selfishness bind them, and they are drifting farther and farther away from the truth. They believe that they can free themselves by cutting ties with others, by standing alone, but this is a lie. True freedom, true independence, can only be found in love. Love for each other, love for the world, love for me, and love for the Creator." The words, though soothing, carried a profound weight. I felt the enormity of the task ahead of me, and I felt the deep, sorrowful truth of his statement. The world was blind to the very thing that would free them. The idea of freedom that they held so dearly, the independence they fought so desperately to protect, was the very thing that was keeping them enslaved. It was like a prisoner trying to break out of a cage by building higher walls, never realizing that the key was not to escape, but to open the door and walk out together. "Do you see?" Jesus asked, his eyes searching mine. "Their freedom is hollow. It is a lie that they cling to because they do not understand the fullness of my love. The more they pursue self-reliance, the more they fall into bondage. The more they strive to be independent, the more isolated they become." I nodded slowly. It was all so clear. The world had been grasping at shadows, unaware that the light they sought was already within reach. And yet, they didn't know how to reach it because they thought they had to fight for it alone. Jesus took a step closer to me, his presence radiant with love. "It is not too late," he said, his voice now tender and filled with compassion. "But the time to act is now. You must return to the world, my child. You have seen the truth, and you must share it. You must show them that true independence comes not from isolation, but from unity with each other and with the divine." I felt the weight of his words sink deep into my being. The thought of returning to the broken, fragmented world was daunting. The peace I had felt in his presence was intoxicating. How could I leave this realm of unity, of love, of eternal connection? How could I go back to a place that felt so far removed from the peace I had just known? But Jesus' voice, filled with both love and urgency, cut through my hesitation. "Do not fear," he said gently. "You are not alone. I will be with you. The Holy Spirit will guide you. And though the world may resist, though many may not understand, your message will plant seeds of change. There are those who will hear, those who will embrace the truth of unity. You must help them see that love, forgiveness, and community are the true sources of freedom." I felt a stirring within me, a renewed sense of purpose. I could no longer stay in this realm of peace and comfort while the world continued to spiral into confusion and division. I had seen the truth of connection, of love, of true freedom, and I knew that it was my mission to share it. But I am not ready, I said, my voice trembling. I am afraid. The world is so broken. The people are so lost. How can I possibly help them? Jesus smiled, a smile filled with infinite compassion. You are ready. You are ready because you have seen what is true. You have felt the freedom of love. You have seen the pain of division, and you have seen the power of unity. You are ready because you understand the message, and it is that message that will heal the world. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and a wave of peace washed over me, dispelling every doubt, every fear. Go now, return to them. Show them the way. The world is waiting. In that moment, something within me clicked. The fear and uncertainty that had once held me back were replaced by a deep, unshakable resolve. I understood now. I had a mission. The world needed to hear this truth. It wasn't enough for me to have seen it. It wasn't enough for me to feel it. I had to share it. I had to speak of the love that binds all things together, of the freedom that comes from surrendering our need for isolation and embracing the greater unity. I had a purpose, and I knew it was time to return. Thank you, I whispered, my heart full of gratitude and awe. Thank you for showing me the way. And with that, I felt myself begin to drift, slowly, gently, back toward the world I had left behind. The world I was about to return to, not as a man alone, but as a messenger, carrying the truth of true freedom. I was ready to go back. The first thing I felt as consciousness returned to me was pain. A sharp, jagged pain that sliced through my chest, my arms, and my legs like 1,000 needles piercing my flesh. My whole body screamed in agony, as if every inch of me was being pulled apart by some invisible force. But even as I lay there, struggling to breathe, there was something else, a feeling, a sense that overshadowed the pain. A feeling that was almost transcendent. I could hear voices, muffled and distant at first, then slowly becoming clearer as my mind began to piece itself together. "He's waking up," someone shouted. I heard footsteps rushing around, the clatter of medical equipment, and the frantic energy of people working, trying to save me. But amidst the chaos, I felt strangely calm. My senses, though dulled by the haze of pain, were alive in a way that I had never experienced before. It was as if I had just returned from a vast journey, from a place where time and space were irrelevant, a place where love and truth held all things together. I was aware of the paramedics working quickly to stabilize me, their hands gentle but firm, moving me into position as they attached tubes and monitors to my battered body. But I could hear their astonishment, the disbelief in their voices. They were amazed that I was even alive. They couldn't understand how I had survived the explosion, how I had come through it at all. "You're lucky to be alive," one of them said, her voice filled with awe as she looked at me with wide eyes. "We thought we lost you back there." I wanted to tell them that I had been somewhere far beyond this place, somewhere where life and death blurred together, and where I had learned things that were beyond their understanding. But the words felt foreign on my tongue, as if I had returned to a body that wasn't quite my own anymore. As I lay in that hospital bed, my body aching and broken, I realized that everything had changed. I wasn't the same man who had set up that fireworks display, or the same man who had been so fiercely independent, clinging to the belief that freedom came from control. No, I had returned with a mission, with a purpose far greater than I could have ever imagined. The memories of what I had witnessed, the light, the love, the deep unity, kept flooding my mind. I had seen the truth. I had felt the love of Jesus, and he had entrusted me with a message. True freedom, true independence was not found in isolation or self-reliance. It was found in love, in unity, in connection with others and with the divine. It was about surrendering to the greater whole, about living in harmony with the world around us. The doctors and nurses continued to work around me, but in that moment, I wasn't focused on the machines or the sterile white walls. I was focused on something much greater, on the mission that had been given to me. I had to share this message. I had to tell everyone about what I had seen, about the truth that would set them free. As the hours passed and the pain slowly subsided, I was moved to a recovery room. My family arrived soon after. their faces a mixture of concern and relief. My wife, Melissa, looked at me with eyes that were both afraid and overjoyed. She had always worried about my line of work, about the dangers I faced each time I set up the fireworks displays. And now, seeing me alive, she couldn't believe it. "You're here," she whispered, holding my hand tightly. We thought we lost you." "I was somewhere," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I saw something. I learned something, Melissa." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but I could see that she was listening, her full attention on me. I wasn't sure where to begin, how to explain the vastness of what I had experienced. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized that this wasn't just about me. This was about all of us. I began to speak slowly, trying to find the words. "It's not what we think, Melissa. We've been chasing after the wrong kind of freedom. We've been taught to believe that freedom is about being independent, about standing alone. But that's not it. That's not true freedom." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" "I saw it," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of what I had experienced. "I saw the truth, and it's so much bigger than anything we've been told. I saw that true freedom comes from love. It comes from unity. It comes from being part of something greater than ourselves, not from trying to isolate ourselves from others. I was shown that independence isn't about self-reliance. It's about connection. It's about being free from fear, from division, from loneliness. It's about love." The words flowed from me, spilling out in a rush, as though I couldn't hold them back. We're all connected. We're not meant to live in isolation, Melissa. We're meant to live in community, in harmony. The world has it all wrong. People are so focused on proving their own worth, on fighting for their own rights, but they don't see that in doing so, they're creating more walls. They're dividing themselves from each other, from the love that can heal them. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke, not from pain, but from a deep, overwhelming sense of urgency. I knew what I had to do. "I saw Jesus, Melissa. He told me I had to share this message. The world is at a crossroads. People need to understand the truth of love, of forgiveness, of connection. It's not about standing alone, it's about coming together." My wife was silent for a long moment, her face softening as she listened. She didn't fully understand, but I could see that she felt something deep within her. She held my hand tighter, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Jesus?" she whispered. "You saw Jesus?" I nodded, feeling the weight of his presence still lingering in my soul. "Yes, I did, and he told me to go back. He told me to help people understand that love, forgiveness, and unity are the true sources of freedom." As I shared my story, I could see the skepticism in the eyes of some of my family members. They didn't understand. Not yet. How could they? But there were others too. My sister Sarah looked at me with wide eyes, her hand over her mouth in disbelief. She too could feel the weight of what I was saying, even if she didn't yet grasp the full extent of it. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I had a message that I couldn't keep to myself any longer. I had seen the truth, and I knew it was not just for me. It was for the world. I began to share my story wherever I could, first with my family and close friends, then with others who would listen. I spoke to anyone who would hear, sharing the message of true freedom, of love, and of unity. Some turned away, dismissing my words as the ramblings of someone who had been through a traumatic experience. Others listened, their hearts open to the possibility of something more. But I knew that the message had to spread. The world was at a critical juncture. People were trapped in their own cycles of division and isolation, thinking that freedom could only come through personal success and self-reliance. But the truth was that freedom came through connection, through love, through forgiveness, through unity. I could see it now clearer than ever. It was a message that the world needed to hear. It was a message that would change everything if enough people listened. And as I shared it, I felt a deep sense of purpose, a calling that could not be ignored. The world was in turmoil, but it didn't have to stay that way. I had been given the truth, and now it was my mission to help others find it. The time to act was now. I had returned with a mission, and I wasn't going to stop until the world understood. True freedom came not from standing apart, but from coming together, and that was a message worth sharing.